It's me here to give you the lecture for Chapter 11. It's fairly short and easy. I think Chapters 10 and 11 are sort of some of the easiest material. It's kind of more general as opposed to learning all about the different nutrients, which is a lot of specific information. These two chapters are a little bit more general, just sort of understanding the concepts of how to control your weight through energy balance, calories in versus calories burned, and also through physical activity and the different types of physical activity there are, and sort of the benefits and risks of overweight, underweight, etc., inactivity, too much activity. So I'm hoping this lecture will be fairly short. I'm hoping for around an hour, but it might run an hour and a half because I tend to be fairly chatty. Okay, so Chapter 11, all about nutrition for a physically active lifestyle. And also about becoming more physically active. So don't think, oh, I'm not an athlete, so I don't need to pay attention to this chapter. For instance, like when you're thinking about your own self and your own diet analysis, this chapter is relevant to everyone. It talks about what are the physical activity requirements for Americans to be optimally healthy. So there's sort of a distinction between physical activity and exercise. Physical activity is any type of muscle movement that basically burns calories. This doesn't have to be exercise, okay? Exercise is more of a term for purposeful, planned physical activity. Like you go to the gym, you go for a run, you go play softball with your friends, okay? These are sort of like planned activities where you are purposefully engaging in physical activity. But physical activity can be walking your dog, cleaning your room, gardening, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Okay, physical activity can come in little bits and pieces throughout the day that actually add up at the end of the day to increase your physical fitness. So this is a cute poster, an old CDC poster about different types of physical activity that are everywhere you go. You know, washing your car, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, shopping, you know, walking around the mall. So there's a lot of different ways to get your physical activity in without necessarily doing exercise, okay? So physical activity is pretty important for health. I like this cartoon, so I made it a whole slide. This doctor is saying to his patient, which fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? Point being, a lot of people use the excuse they don't have time to exercise. They don't have time for physical activity. But if you don't make time for it, you have an increased risk of a lot of chronic diseases. The same chronic diseases that should sound familiar now. Cardiovascular disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cancer, okay? All of those things, physical activity can reduce your risk for all of those diseases, and leading a sedentary lifestyle can increase your risk for all of those diseases. So what are the recommendations for physical activity? The recommended amount is that adult Americans engage in moderately intense activity, and we'll talk about what that means, for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, okay? Or vigorous intensity physical activity, 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week, and some strength exercises twice a week. So either moderate activity for a little longer duration, a little more frequently, or more vigorous activities a little bit less frequently, okay? So currently, surveys have shown that almost half of Americans do not meet these recommendations, okay? More than half, actually, 52% are either insufficiently active or inactive, meaning they're not getting their minimum 30 minutes, 5 days a week, or this other option here, okay? So this really isn't that hard. The 30 minutes doesn't have to be 30 minutes in a block. It can be 30 minutes over the course of the day. You spend 10 minutes vacuuming your house, you spend 10 minutes walking the dog, and you spend another 10 minutes washing your car. So, you know, I don't know. You can add them up. They can be, they're cumulative. So, and 5 times a week, that's not too much if you think about it, if you do the math. So, but for some of us, it takes an effort. So the benefits of regular exercise are not just reducing your risk of those chronic diseases I mentioned before. There's a lot of benefits. I'm actually going to spend a little time on this slide walking through them. This is a figure from your textbook. Psychologically, it can reduce your stress and anxiety. Exercise can. It produces endorphins, which are hormones that sort of make you feel good. It can improve your self-image, your psychological well-being through improving your self-image, making you feel like you've accomplished something. It can, if it helps you lose weight or helps you change your body shape into a more pleasant, or pleasing shape, that can make you feel good as well. It helps you sleep. People who get regular exercise sleep better. It increases your cardiovascular fitness, so your heart and respiratory system, and it increases, or it can reduce your blood pressure. So together those things help prevent heart disease, hypertension, stroke. It can aid in weight loss, so exercising or physical activity burns extra calories, so you can increase your physical activity and keep your calories the same and still lose weight. It improves your blood glucose regulation. Some people can treat their type 2 diabetes simply by engaging in more physical activity. Studies have shown that just adding physical activity, even if there's no weight loss, oftentimes helps improve glucose tolerance. In terms of fitness, it can also help you build, so not only can it help you lose weight, it can also help you build muscle and build strength. Make you feel better, make you feel stronger. There are some studies that show that it protects the brain from dementia or like even Alzheimer's, that people who exercise are less likely to sort of lose those functions as they get older. And it reduces your risk of colon cancer, and it strengthens your bones. It especially weight-bearing exercises, things like weightlifting, running, jogging, cycling. Most exercises are weight-bearing exercises. They put pressure on your bones and stimulate bone growth and bone development and actually strengthen your bones. So they can help to prevent osteoporosis as you get older. Exercise also improves your immune function. People who exercise get their recommended amount of exercise, get sick less often, and overall increases your lifespan. Exercise does. So a lot of benefits of exercise that don't necessarily have to do with burning calories or losing weight, okay? So when we talk about the intensity of physical activity, we're talking about how much exertion you're doing, basically how fast you're breathing and how much you're sweating. So we said that the recommendation is 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week of moderate intensity activity. So what is that? Or I guess, how do we measure intensity? So intensity of a workout can be, measured by sweating and breathing fast, but different people of different fitness are going to sweat differently, etc. So one way that we can measure the intensity of an activity is by measuring your heart rate when you're doing that activity. Okay, so your maximum heart rate, the quick and dirty way to calculate your maximum heart rate is this formula here, 220 minus your age. So 220 minus 30 would be 190. So my maximum heart rate would be 190, okay? And you can see that here on the graph too. Age 30, maximum heart rate up here is about 190. So when it comes to different intensity workouts, a moderate intensity workout is one that has your heart beating at 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. So if my maximum heart rate is 190, 50% of that is what? A little bit less than 100, 95, okay? So between 95 and 130 or so would be a moderate intensity workout for me. So like a walk or some brisk walk would probably get me there. Um, a vigorous intensity workout, like jogging or cycling, is going to get your heart rate up even more than that, usually in like the 70 to 85% zone. Some people will work out even in a 85 to 100% heart rate zone. That can be dangerous to maintain for long periods of time. That's usually like short bursts, like if you're doing sprints, like hill sprints or something. But these are the moderate intensity zone and this vigorous intensity zone. Those are zones that you can sustain some more prolonged physical activity. Okay, so when it comes to physical activity, there are different types of physical activity. And was it University of Georgia or Georgia State came up with this physical activity pyramid, kind of like the old food pyramid. And on the bottom here, the things that you should do sort of most often are just getting your regular moderate intensity physical activity in, those everyday tasks, doing laundry, walking the dog, okay? That you should have at least 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Then there's the exercises that you can do to increase your physical fitness. There's 3 types of exercise that we'll talk about. There's aerobic exercise, flexibility exercise, and strength exercise. Each of these strengthens different systems and has different sort of goal, different sort of fitness outcome. So these are things that you should try to incorporate, ideally try to incorporate on a regular basis throughout the week, depending on which type of activity it is. In order to become aerobically fit, you want to do that 3 to 5 days a week, whereas if you're trying to achieve flexibility or strength, you can get by with 2 to 3 days a week for maintenance of those things. Then it also talks about recreational activities. These are things that are more for fun, like so the picture here is someone going roller skating. You get together, play softball, like if you're in a softball league or frisbee or something like that, a couple times a week. And then things that you should be doing sparingly are sedentary activities, playing video games, watching TV. Those should be done. You should really try to limit that time. But as we all know, that can be hard to do. So the different types of physical activity, a little more detail. Remember I said there was aerobic exercise, strength training or resistance training, and flexibility training, or in this case I said stretching. Okay, so aerobic exercise is any type of exercise that gets your heart rate up, that gets you breathing fast and sweating, okay? Walking, running, swimming, cross-country skiing, cycling, all examples I have here. Picture of Homer Simpson running I don't know if it's a 5K or marathon or something he's running. These are all examples of aerobic exercise. Different intensities, so walking is a lower intensity than running, but both still get your heart rate increased, your breathing rate increased, and they improve your cardiovascular health. That's sort of the purpose of aerobic exercise, is to increase and improve the health of your heart and your lungs, and also, your muscles. Resistance training, or also known as strength training, is designed to help strengthen your muscles. So not necessarily to build cardiovascular health, but to actually strengthen certain muscles. And this is usually done by weightlifting, or you're using some kind of resistance bands, or doing, push-ups or pull-ups. All of those are ways to strengthen your muscles, and they do cause you to breathe fast and sweat, but not in a sustained kind of a way that these exercises do. Lastly, flexibility is a type of fitness. How flexible your muscles are. If your muscles are, the more flexible you are, the more you can get by better. If you're very stiff all the time, you can't bend over, it hurts to, move or sit in chairs, you're not as physically fit. So the more flexible you are, flexibility is actually a type of fitness and can be achieved through stretching exercises. So yoga is very popular, Pilates, any type of stretching exercise. A lot of different martial arts like Tai Chi, things like that, are good for improving your flexibility fitness. Okay, So how do we fuel all of this exercise, all of this physical activity? How do our bodies fuel that? Well, technically we've been learning this all semester, but we haven't gotten down to the sort of nitty-gritty science details of it. But energy for muscular work comes from a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And it looks like this. There's an adenosine molecule that has 3 phosphates. That's what the triphosphate is, 3 phosphate groups. And this last phosphate, this last bond here, is a very high energy bond. So when it breaks, energy is released, and that energy can be harnessed to do work, to actually cause muscles to contract, for example. Okay, so the resulting products of this reaction of ATP being used for energy, you break this bond, that energy gets used to fuel some work, and what you have left is ADP, which stands for adenosine diphosphate, 2 phosphates, okay, and a free inorganic phosphate group. Okay, so these 2 products here can actually be recycled to make more ATP through some of the metabolism processes we're going to talk about. So it's sort of this, back and forth thing. ATP, you use it to get energy, to fuel chemical reactions, and to fuel things like muscle contraction, to fuel work. But then the products, you can then add energy that you get from calories, from food, to reform that ATP that can be used in cells. So remember at the beginning of the class when I talked about calories versus ATP, that calories are chemical energy that's in food, and ATP is energy that's in cells. And I use that analogy of currency, that it's like American dollars versus the euro, that it's all still money, it's all still energy, but depending on where you are, you have to convert it to the different form. Okay, so ATP is the energy currency of cells. Calories are the energy currency of food, I guess. So how does this energy metabolism occur? Well, the major source of energy for our cells is from carbohydrates, from glucose, okay? We technically can break down all of the macronutrients to make ATP, but mostly we do use glucose. Also, we can use fatty acids. Rarely do we use proteins. So the most common the most common macronutrient that's broken down for energy is glucose, and it's broken down through this process called glycolysis. The breakdown of glucose is called glycolysis. It's a 10-step reaction, okay? And the product of that reaction initially is a molecule called pyruvate, or pyruvic acid, okay? So you get 2 pyruvic acid molecules from one glucose. Glucose has 6 carbons. Pyruvic acid has 3 carbons. So you break down one glucose into 2 pyruvic acid molecules. Now, glycolysis itself produces a small amount of ATP, okay? But what really generates the most energy, the most ATP, is taking those pyruvic acids molecules and further metabolizing them, okay? And those pyruvic acid molecules can be metabolized by one of 2 ways, depending on whether there's oxygen around, okay? Now, we breathe in oxygen, so because we want to have oxygen around, so we can turn this pyruvic acid into a maximal amount of ATP through aerobic metabolism. Aerobic is a word that means with oxygen, okay? Aerobic, air, with air. And when aerobic metabolism takes place, pyruvic acid is metabolized into about 36 to 38 ATPs. From 2 pyruvic acid molecules, you get 36 to 38 ATPs. So that's pretty cool. The other byproduct of aerobic metabolism is carbon dioxide, which we then breathe out of our lungs, and water. We talked about water being a product of, that we do get a small amount of water from metabolism. It's a byproduct of metabolism. Okay, in some instances though, oxygen is not present in our cells. Now, when would that happen? For instance, if you are lifting something really heavy and you kind of go, and you hold your breath, okay, for a second. So oxygen's kind of scarce. Also, if you are sprinting, like if you're doing like a very quick sprint, and your muscles are working so hard and so fast, they use up all the oxygen, and your blood can't circulate oxygen to your muscle fast enough, okay? Then for, a couple of seconds there, the environment in that muscle cell is actually without oxygen, okay? So under anaerobic conditions, that is without oxygen present, pyruvate goes down a different pathway called anaerobic metabolism, and it gets turned into lactic acid. Okay, and this slide here just shows you those same things, but it shows you a little more detail about where in the cell each of these things happen. So anaerobic metabolism without oxygen, that occurs in the cytoplasm. Glucose undergoes glycolysis to make two pyruvate molecules, which then get converted into lactate, okay? And so lactate, sort of the end product of anaerobic metabolism. But if oxygen is present, then those pyruvate molecules actually get transferred into the mitochondria, which is an organelle in the cell that's like the powerhouse of the cell. That's where all the ATP is made. I mean, like a majority of the ATP is made, because that pyruvate then goes through a series of other chemical reactions that results in the output of 30 some odd ATPs, carbon dioxide, and water. Okay, so mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, where most of the ATP is churned out. So muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria because they need to make a lot of ATP, whereas cells like, I don't know, neurons maybe? Try to think of some cell that doesn't do a whole lot, just kind of sits there, and it doesn't have a lot of mitochondria, okay? But muscle cells have to have a lot of mitochondria because they have to make a lot of ATP. So technically there are 3 different ways that cells can generate ATP when they need it. There's the PCR ATP system, the phosphocreatine adenosine triphosphate system, we'll talk about that, the lactic acid system, and the oxygen systems, okay? I think this is kind of weird that the book classifies them this way, but so be it. We'll go with it. So PCR stands for phosphocreatine, or you also may have heard of it referred to as creatine phosphate, which is more common, and you can find creatine phosphate supplements in stores. But creatine phosphate, phosphocreatine, same thing. And it is kind of a similar molecule to ATP in that it has this phosphate bond that's a high energy bond. This phosphate is bonded to this creatine, and it's a high energy bond, and when it breaks off, it provides energy to fuel chemical reactions. And in this case, phosphocreatine can be used in a pinch to create ATP on the spot. So glycolysis itself is a 10-step process. To then convert that pyruvate with aerobic metabolism into ATP, there's another 15 or so chemical reactions that have to take place. It takes a few minutes to do all those chemical reactions, even with enzymes catalyzing them, okay? When you need energy in a pinch, you need ATP right now, the best way to do it is through this phosphocreatine pathway. So in a pinch, when you need a quick burst of energy, your muscle can quickly generate small amounts of ATP using stores of phosphocreatine, okay? So your muscles have small stores of phosphocreatine and ATP that it saves for what it's kind of like if we go with the whole currency analogy. Your book says that your cells have ATP like they're stored in a bank, like a savings, but that's a terrible analogy because you don't. It's not your savings account. Your glycogen and your fat stores in your adipose tissue, that's your savings account. That's really your energy that you have put away in savings. ATP stores and phosphocreatine stores, that's like the cash you have in your wallet that you carry around with you. I don't know about all of you, but I like to carry, maybe like $20 to $50 or something in my wallet. I don't like to have a whole lot of cash on me all the time. I just have enough to, if I need some cash in a pinch, like I want to buy lunch or something. Okay, so cells, muscle cells, same thing. They have small amounts of phosphocreatine and ATP stored away, and if they need energy in a pinch, they use up those ATP stores and create some more very quickly with the phosphocreatine. So this is good for quick bursts of energy, like a short sprint, okay, like a 50-meter dash, or like if you are, like a, whatever they call these people, the heavy, Ironman, heavyweight champs, whatever, when you have to lift really hard, really heavy weights just for a minute and then put it down. So these types of quick bursts of energy are fueled by this phosphocreatine ATP system. Okay? But beyond about 30 seconds of energy needs, you need to go to a bigger reserve. And that's loading. So, and the phosphocreatine and ATP system also functions in an anaerobic fashion. You don't need to have oxygen present for that to function. The other anaerobic option is the lactic acid energy system. So if you are working out really vigorously and your muscle cells are not getting enough oxygen because they're just working so hard they can't even get oxygen fast enough, and you've depleted the phosphocreatine ATP system, and you need to legitimately make some more ATP from glucose. You can do glycolysis and undergo the anaerobic pathway where pyruvate becomes lactic acid. So muscle cells can actually use, they convert that lactic acid into lactate, and then they can actually use that lactate, I think that they can actually use the lactic acid to make energy. There's a pathway where they can actually use lactic acid for energy, and then but they can also recycle the lactic acid, send it back out into the blood where it goes to the liver and gets converted back to glucose and then goes back to the cell, and then potentially, if there's oxygen present, can then be used to make more ATP, but otherwise that it gets recycled to make more lactic acid. So there is this lactic acid pathway that can be used to make energy. Glucose undergoes glycolysis, which makes a small amount of ATP, and then that lactic acid can actually be used for energy as well, or it can be recycled and undergo glycolysis again to make more ATP. So it's a less efficient way of making energy. When there's not oxygen around, energy production is not nearly as efficient. And it used to be thought that lactic acid buildup is what leads to like muscle soreness and cramping the next day. But now they think actually it's more the acid, the hydrogen ions that build up, that kind of acid in your muscles that can lead to fatigue and soreness when you are working out very, very hard, or the day after a difficult workout. So the most efficient way to make energy, to make ATP, is that using the oxygen energy systems, using the aerobic metabolism of either carbohydrates and or fats. Proteins, not so much, okay? We really reserve our proteins for other functions. So first and foremost, we're going to break down carbs and we're going to break down fats. Now, which situations do we do each? So carbohydrates, very important fuel source for the brain. The brain really can't even use fatty acids very much. I mean, 90% of the ATP generated by the brain is from glucose. It's because glucose, which is, the major carbohydrate fuel source for us, is very easy to break down. We have a very efficient mechanism, glycolysis, and then shunting it to the mitochondria to make ATP. That is a very efficient pathway that we have. It has to do with how much, as the book explains, it has to do with how much oxygen is actually present in glucose. But anyway, the important thing is glucose is broken down more efficiently. Therefore, it's sort of our first primary source of fuel. That's where our cells go to. When they need energy, they say, where's the glucose? Let's start breaking that down. And as you know, we do store some glucose in our bodies in the form of glycogen. glycogen is stored both in the muscles and in the liver. And we have enough glycogen stored in our bodies to last for a couple of hours of physical activity. I think the book says like 2 minutes to 3 hours or something. 3 to 4 hours, depending on how vigorous the activity is. Okay? You can fuel activity for a few hours with just your glycogen stores and your carbohydrates. So some activities that are largely fueled by carbohydrates, going for like, swimming for 30 minutes, playing a game of pickup basketball for a couple of hours, okay? Those are going to be very dependent on your carbohydrate stores, on your carbohydrate levels. Fats are also a very good source of energy. Fats are the most energy-dense nutrient. Remember, 9 kilocalories per gram versus carbohydrates, which have how many? 4 kilocalories per gram, right? So technically fats provide more energy, but our bodies are less efficient at breaking them down. So it takes a little bit longer to break down fats. So they're sort of our secondary source of energy. Or we break them down sort of simultaneously as the carbohydrates. So while we're getting our energy from carbohydrates, we're sort of simultaneously breaking down fats in anticipation of needing more energy. But the other time that we use fats is when we've depleted our glycogen stores. So, or when we're doing some activity that doesn't require, that's less intense, let's put it that way. So more intense activities demand a quick source of energy, so from carbohydrates, whereas a less intense activity like a long hike or just resting or just walking, okay, then in those activities you tend to burn more fats because there's more time for your body to break them down. Okay, so there's a neat picture. I'll come back to that. Okay, so this is a great sort of graph from your book that shows you what percentage of your energy comes from fat and what comes from carbohydrates during different types of exercise. So a sprinting 200-meter hurdle is a sprint. You're working hard. You need energy now. Your muscles need it. Bam, bam, bam. Most of the energy that you're going to get to fuel that type of activity is going to be from carbohydrates. Okay? You do something slower and less intense, like walking, and a lot of that energy is going to come from fats. Okay, so you get a lot more fat breakdown when you do low intensity activities. And then here's sort of the gamut in between. The one here, weightlifting, it has a little double asterisk saying that even though weightlifting is a very strenuous, rigorous activity, you do actually still burn a lot of fats when you're weightlifting because there's a lot of downtime. Weightlifting, there's a couple minutes of actually doing the reps, the repetitions, and the exercise, but then there's also a couple minutes in between each one where you're resting. So during those resting periods, it gives your body time to actually break down fats, whereas during the lifting periods, that's when your muscles are really dependent on the carbohydrates, okay? So when it comes to aerobic metabolism and breaking down carbohydrates and fats when there's oxygen present, okay, there's something called aerobic capacity. So if your body needs oxygen, if your cells need oxygen in order to break down carbohydrates and fatty acids to make ATP, the more oxygen you can transport to those muscles, the better you can oxygenate those muscles, the better able you are to make ATP. Okay, so as you train and work out, exercise more often, more frequently, your body actually improves its ability to transport oxygen to muscles and therefore improves its ability to make ATP. So that ability to transport oxygen is referred to as the aerobic capacity, or VO2 max. Okay, you might heard of personal trainers or something might call it VO2 max, also known as aerobic capacity. It's the body's ability to deliver oxygen to your muscles, and the more you exercise, the more efficient your body becomes at transporting oxygen to your muscles, and the more efficient your muscles become at making ATP. So that's why as you work out more regularly, your endurance and your stamina improves because you're actually being able to circulate oxygen better. Your cells are actually able to make more ATP because they're getting better and stronger at doing that. Okay, so this is a great summary table from your textbook talking about energy sources for muscles. Okay, so ATP is the main energy source. But we make ATP from all of these different molecules here: phosphocreatine, carbohydrate, fat, and protein. So phosphocreatine is for quick bursts types of exercise, okay? That can help generate ATP. Carbohydrates can generate ATP both under anaerobic and aerobic conditions, so when there's no oxygen or when there is oxygen. When there's no oxygen, when does that happen? That happens when you're doing a high intensity exercise, particularly short high intensity, like very vigorous exercises, okay? So if it's something that lasts from 1 to 30 seconds, you use your phosphocreatine, but beyond 30 seconds, so from about 30 seconds to a couple of minutes, if it's still anaerobic, there's no oxygen there, then you have to start breaking down your carbohydrates. All right, aerobic metabolism of carbohydrate is the most sort of effective way to make ATP. And we do this using our blood glucose and also our glycogen stores in our muscles and our liver. So we have enough glycogen stores and enough glucose stored in our body to last us for about 3 hours of activity. And so that we can use that to make ATP. Beyond that, if our exercise lasts for a very long time and we've depleted all of our carbohydrate stores, we're going to use fat. Also, if our exercise is at a lower intensity or we are just resting, we burn fat for energy because fat takes longer to break down. So you need to have sort of the time to break it down to make energy. But it is an excellent source of energy, so it is one that the body favors and uses a lot when we are at rest, except for the brain. The brain always uses carbohydrate. And then protein here is always used a little bit to some extent. It can be used if you are doing a really long endurance activity and you've depleted your carbohydrate stores, and your fat breakdown is still a little too slow. You can start using protein to make carbohydrate, but that actually is depleting protein from your muscle tissue. You don't really want to do that. So you really want to make sure as an athlete, when you're doing physical activity, that you have enough carbohydrates and fats to fuel the activity that you're doing. So some general dietary advice for athletes. I have them all sort of bulleted on this slide, and then I have a little bit more detail about each of them in upcoming slides. But these are the main things that athletes or people who are engaging in physical activity should really focus on, okay? First of all, energy. And when I say energy, I'm talking about calories, how many calories you need. Okay? If you are engaging in physical activity or exercise, if you are an athlete, you need more energy. If you're doing more exercise and you want to maintain your weight, you need to maintain your energy balance, you need to be eating more calories because you're going to be burning more calories. So people who are serious athletes, who train 5 to 7 days a week, often need a diet of 3,000 calories or more, and there's some sample menus in the chapter, but the menu can come in all forms and fashions. So often 3,000 calories a day or more, that's a lot of calories. You need to make sure you're getting that energy. If you're not, you're going to start losing weight. You're going to start feeling fatigued and tired. You're not going to have enough glycogen stores and fat stores to fuel your exercise. Okay, so getting the proper amounts of energy to fuel physical activity is important. If you are engaging in physical activity as a form of weight loss, then you want to make sure you're getting enough energy to fuel your activity, but still have an energy deficit at the end of the day so that you are losing weight in the long run. The best way to get energy for the best form of energy for athletes is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can be burned in anaerobic and aerobic conditions. They produce a lot of ATP very quickly, okay? And we can store them to some extent as glycogen. And since glucose is sort of the first thing that's used, your glycogen stores are the first thing that are depleted. So you want to always replace those at the end of a workout. So if you are an athlete and you don't get enough carbohydrates in your diet, often leaves you feeling very fatigued, or you fatigue very quickly during physical activity because you don't have that important fuel source. A lot of times, some athletes don't realize that they need to consume so many carbs. A lot of athletes think that they need to focus on protein. So I have this little title here that I made up myself, Protein Propaganda. There's a lot of sort of myth out there in the media that athletes need tons of protein to build muscle and for recovery, that protein is the most important macronutrient for athletes, but it's not. Yes, protein is important. Yes, protein contributes to muscle growth and muscle repair. But athletes, they do need a little bit more than the average person, but they are eating twice as much as the average person as it is already. So they, especially with the American diet, really don't need to focus on protein at all. If they just eat an adequate, moderate, balanced, and varied diet, they're probably getting more than enough protein. More than enough complete proteins without needing to sort of, focus on eating lots of meat or taking supplements, like protein powders or protein bars. There's no need for that. A lot of athletes focus far too much on protein and not enough on carbs. So, something to think about. And also another nutrient that's very important for athletes are fluids. If you are working out, if you're exercising or engaging in physical activity, especially if it's hot out, you're sweating, you're losing fluid. So you need to make sure that you're replacing the fluids that you lose. Okay, so going back to that carbohydrate thing, that athletes need to focus on carbohydrate intake. It's because your your physical activity and your exercise are largely fueled by glucose that comes from blood glucose and comes from glycogen stores in your liver and your muscles. So after you work out, you've depleted a lot of your glycogen stores, and you want to eat more glycogen in order to replenish those glycogen stores. So a lot of athletes, particularly marathon runners, endurance athletes, often describe this phenomenon of hitting the wall. Okay, so this is pretty typical. In a marathon's 26.2 miles. Typically around mile 20 is when people say they hit the wall. Between mile 18 and mile 22 is where you hit the wall, which is where the average runner basically has depleted all of their glycogen stores, and they suddenly feel very low energy, and everything just, their body just starts to hurt more. And that's from depleting glycogen stores. So what endurance athletes can actually do in order to improve their performance in these endurance activities is to carb load or carbo load or glycogen load, which is essentially a process of increasing your glycogen stores so that you don't hit this wall, by a process of increasing your carbohydrate intake while simultaneously decreasing your physical activity. So increasing how much glucose you eat, but decreasing your physical activity, then that means that you put more of that glucose into storage. And you do this for about a week or two before an upcoming event or race. So it's not like a one-night thing. So a lot of people who do run five, I used to do I used to be a runner before I got pregnant, and hopefully I'll be a runner again soon. But in grad school, I used to run a lot of 5Ks and 10Ks with my friends, and we'd all go out to dinner the night before for carb loading, okay, which wasn't really carb loading. You go out, to some pasta restaurant and you have some, carbs for dinner. But that wasn't truly carbo loading. True carb loading or glycogen loading takes a week or two of increasing your carb intake while tapering off your physical activity in order to maximize those glycogen stores. Okay? So the other important nutrient for athletes to focus on are fluids. Hydration is very, very important for athletes because they're sweating. And I keep saying athletes because the book uses that, but really I'm not talking about like professional athletes. I'm really talking about anyone who's engaging in exercise, okay? You can all be athletes if you engage in physical activity regularly, okay? So hydration is important for anyone who's engaging in physical activity because physical activity often leads to sweating. It leads to an increase in body temperature, and water is very important for regulating our body temperature and help keeping it down. So if you become dehydrated, and if you're dehydrated and you're not exercising, you get headache, you get lightheaded, you know. There are some, detrimental side effects to dehydration if you're not exercising. If you are exercising, the effects are even more pronounced and more dangerous because of your inability to regulate your body temperature that's rising. So dehydration for someone who's exercising can lead to some serious heat-related illnesses. So the first sort of mild dehydration can lead to heat cramps, often in the calves or the abdomen, abdominal muscles or the calf muscle. Basically, it's just muscle spasms, and you have to kind of stop and hydrate and massage the muscles. It's from fluid electrolyte imbalances, and fluids and electrolytes are important for muscle contraction. So if you have an imbalance, it can cause muscle spasming. And the next sort of stage of fluid heat-related illnesses is heat exhaustion. So if you are exercising in warm temperatures and you're not hydrating enough, you're sweating a bunch, so you're losing a whole bunch of fluid and you're not replacing it fast enough, you start feeling very fatigued. Your skin can get kind of damp and gray looking. You start sporting a low-grade fever like 102. Okay, this is known as heat exhaustion. You become very exhausted, very fatigued. And this can progress to heat stroke, which can be fatal. So it's really important to catch someone if they are suffering from heat exhaustion and help them hydrate and cool down, because otherwise they can suffer from heat stroke, which is a sort of more advanced state where you actually stop sweating because you're so dehydrated. Your body actually stops sweating. You start having this rapid, shallow breathing. You get a high fever because your body temperature can't come down, so it keeps going up. And you start having confusion. You can even pass out and go into a coma and die. So staying hydrated when you're exercising, especially in hot weather, is very important. When it comes to fluids, which is better, water or sports drinks? Does it matter? The thing with water we talked about in the chapter on fluids and minerals is you can actually overhydrate. If you drink a ton of water, if you're sweating a lot, so you're losing water, but you're also losing salt, you're losing sodium and other electrolytes, okay? If you are only replacing the water and not replacing the electrolytes, you can actually overhydrate. So water is a great way to hydrate normally. And it's a great way to hydrate when you're exercising if you're doing sort of a low intensity activity, if you're working out for less than 30 minutes. Some people say less than an hour. Okay, but if you're working out for more than 30 minutes, or some people say more than an hour, but we'll go with what the textbook says on this one, more than 30 minutes, then it's good to use some kind of a sports drink to replenish both your liquids and your electrolytes. Also, if it's really hot out and you're sweating a lot, basically if you're sweating a lot, if you're doing some activity that causes you to sweat a lot, the best way to replenish your fluids is with a sports drink. The book actually has a neat little recipe to make your own sports drinks by by diluting fruit juice with water and adding a little bit of salt to it. You can make your own sports drink without having to spend a whole bunch of money on brand names like Gatorade. So that was kind of neat. So the other thing that was interesting this book taught me was that apparently there's been research that suggests that your thirst mechanism, your sort of is your body's way of regulating your fluid intake, and does it very, very well, very effectively. So for a long time, especially like in marathons and endurance activities, sports, medicine people used to say, drink even if you're not thirsty. You need to hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Make sure that that you're keeping your fluids up, because you might not, necessarily know that you're becoming dehydrated. But apparently thirst is a very good indicator of your hydration status. And if you are forcing yourself to drink when you're not thirsty, your fluid status is probably fine. So you still want to, be conscious and be aware and make sure that you're staying hydrated, but no need to overhydrate yourself to make yourself drink a bunch when you're not thirsty. Sometimes I find that I don't know I'm thirsty, like I don't feel thirsty until like I get a drink and I put it to my mouth, and then when I start drinking, it's like gulp, 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 and you're like, man, I guess I was pretty thirsty. I didn't even realize that I was thirsty. So it's good to make sure that you're, picking up the drink. But if you take a sip and you're like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it, then just put it down. If you take a sip and you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize how thirsty I was. There you go. That's what I'm talking about with thirst being sort of the natural regulator of your hydration status. So there's a couple of other nutrients that are important for athletes besides what I said before, carbs, proteins, and fluids. Antioxidants are important. So exercise increases your breathing rate, so you're breathing in a lot more oxygen, okay? And oxygen does what? It causes oxidative stress, a form of forming free radicals, okay? And free radicals and oxidative stress can damage cells, can cause, lead to cancer and aging and, all kinds of, damage. And exercise can actually cause more oxidative stress on cells. So there was some belief that antioxidants are good for athletes. Athletes have higher needs for antioxidants, like vitamin antioxidants, minerals, and vitamins that act as antioxidants. However, the body actually has its own system of generating antioxidants. There are nutrients that are antioxidants that we eat and we get in our diet, but there's also endogenous antioxidants that our body generates. So exercise actually induces antioxidant production by the body. So it's sort of not thought that it's not recommended that athletes take extra antioxidant supplements, because it could block the natural synthesis of antioxidants by the body, which is very protective, because there's no research that suggests that that exercise increases your risk of cancer or any of those diseases that are caused by oxidative stress, okay, are not caused by increased exercise. If anything, exercise reduces your risk for those diseases. So at one point in time, they thought all this extra oxidative stress means athletes should get more antioxidants in their diet, they should take antioxidant supplements, but none of the research suggests that that's helpful, and in fact, it might actually be detrimental. So antioxidant supplements are not actually recommended for athletes. Iron is something that athletes need to make sure they're aware of their iron status. Iron is really important for transporting oxygen. If you don't have enough iron, you get anemic and you feel very, very weak. So like I said, I used to be a runner. I also used to be someone who donated blood on a regular basis. And there was one time I was training for a half marathon, and it was July, and I was living in Philadelphia. And I was like, oh, I haven't donated blood in a while. So I went and I donated blood, and all was fine. And then a couple days later, I decided to go for my usual run, just for like a short, like 3-mile run. And I could not even run a mile. I thought I was going to pass out. Also, it was July, so it was really hot, and I wasn't quite acclimated to it yet. but I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to pass out. I had no idea why I was so weak and so fatigued. It's because I just gave away all this blood, so technically I was a little bit anemic, and I didn't have enough red blood cells or enough iron to transport oxygen to my muscles while I was running. And it actually took me months to recover from it. Like, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to recover your blood cells, to get grow all your red blood cells back. And I took quite a hit in my fitness, so I actually stopped donating blood because I wanted to run more than I wanted to donate blood after that. So anyway, donation aside, people who start work, if you just start a workout regimen, your blood cells actually start to increase, and your blood volume will start to increase. And the first way that it takes time to make red blood cells, but it doesn't take a lot of time for your body to retain extra water and increase your blood volume. So a lot of times when people start a workout regimen, they initially experience this temporary condition called sports anemia, where their blood gets sort of diluted a little bit. In an effort to increase blood volume by retaining water, it dilutes the amount of red blood cells and the amount of iron that's in your blood. But after a couple of weeks, your blood cells restore themselves, you build up more iron stores, and that sports anemia goes away. So again, iron, important for transporting oxygen. If you're doing a lot of physical activity and exercise, you want to be able to transport oxygen efficiently. Again, it comes down to your aerobic capacity, okay? And then lastly, calcium is another important nutrient that's particularly important for athletes because it helps build strong bones. And if you're, banging the pavement or lifting weights, you need to have some strong bones under those muscles that are to help support your weight. So calcium is also important for muscle contraction. So calcium is another nutrient that athletes want to make sure that they're getting good amounts of. Otherwise, they could suffer from weak bones. And like we saw actually in the last chapter about the female athlete triad, female athletes who they're getting lots of physical activity, which should help build strong bones. If they're not getting the proper nutrition, not getting enough calcium, then they can't effectively build strong bones. So it takes physical activity and the proper nutrients to build strong bones. The last part of the chapter deals with ergogenic aids. The definition of an ergogenic aid is food, devices, dietary supplements, or drugs used to enhance athletic performance, okay? And there's a table that lists several different ergogenic aids on the market, the various claims that are made about them, a little blurb about any supporting scientific evidence, and any side effects, potential side effects of using those things. So a lot of these ergogenic aids that are out there that are marketed are not effective. Scientific research shows there's no effect of using these things. Some of them include a lot of the sort of herbal supplements like glucosamine, chromium, coenzyme Q10, bee pollen. Okay, a lot of these, no benefit. Some of them are actually dangerous, can be dangerous, whether it's because there's toxicity if they're taken in large amounts. Some are just dangerous in general. So the next slide, I have some of the more dangerous ones. A lot of these are more natural, either like amino acids, chromium is a mineral, caffeine, okay, these are all sort of natural, herbal, or minerals supplements. These are drugs. On this, I split the table up into two parts. And a lot of the drugs are very dangerous. Anabolic steroids are illegal in a lot of places. They have some terrible side effects. What is this one? Bloody liver cysts. I love that, okay? Roid rage, they have psychological and emotional, hormonal side effects, and they can be fatal if abused. GHB, which many of you may know of as the date rape drug, is actually marketed as an ergogenic aid, as an athletic enhancement drug. And it can cause death. It's right there. May cause death. Human growth hormone. Most studies show that it doesn't actually benefit anything, and it can be deadly. And DHEA and androstenedione are also shown to have no benefit, and they can also be dangerous to your health. So, try to stay away from these guys. Stay away from these drugs. A lot of them don't do anything and can have very dangerous side effects. Anabolic steroids do actually increase muscle mass and strength. They do do those things, but they can have some very serious side effects and are not healthy. So that's ergogenic aids. A little bit more about caffeine. Caffeine actually is a fairly effective ergogenic aid. It's the most widely used ergogenic aid and is therefore actually regulated by athletic doping agencies. So you can have a certain amount of caffeine in your blood, but there's like a threshold. Beyond that is considered illegal and is considered doping in professional sports. So caffeine enhances mental alertness. That's why a lot of you probably come to class with coffee or soda to keep you awake, right? But it also can enhance muscle contractions. So it does actually function fairly well as an athletic enhancer, just a little bit, a very, very small amount. And large amounts of caffeine can actually have detrimental effects. They can make you shaky and uncoordinated. And so sort of small amounts, moderate amounts of caffeine can, though, be enhancing. Caffeine also happens to be addictive. So people who regularly consume caffeine do form sort of addiction to it. And if they try to withdraw or stop intaking that much caffeine, they do have withdrawal symptoms, usually like headache, fatigue, that kind of a thing. So there's a neat chart here just telling you the caffeine content of different beverages, from a large Starbucks coffee down to like a hot chocolate, and some teas and sodas mixed in here. Red Bull over here, okay, actually doesn't have nearly as much caffeine as coffee, has a lot more sugar. So Red Bull, energy drinks, or any type of energy drink, it's usually a combination of caffeine and sugar to give you energy. And there's also evidence, this isn't mentioned in the book, but there's also some evidence in terms of athletes and caffeine, that caffeine actually helps speed up muscle recovery after workout. It actually increases your glycogen replacement in your muscles. So caffeine actually is present in a lot of what's like goos and power bars and things like fuel things that athletes use during sporting events, because it gives you extra energy, bursts of energy, but it also helps to fuel the recovery process. So now that we've learned about physical activity, what different types of physical activity there are, why they're important, why it's important for our health, now it's time for you to devise a physical fitness plan. This is the highlight section of the chapter, and this is the section that you'll use when you are writing your last diet analysis journal assignment and devising a physical fitness plan for yourself. So the first thing you want to ask are, what are your physical fitness goals? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to increase your muscle mass? Do you want to be able to do a triathlon? Do you want to be able to do a split, increase your flexibility? Okay, there's lots of different goals that people have. Some people just want to be healthy. They just want to do the minimum amount of physical activity to be healthy. They don't necessarily want to lose weight or do a race or be an Olympian. They just want to achieve that 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So first decide on what your fitness goals are. Then you can devise a workout regimen. And the steps for that are on the next slide. But also, as you're doing all of this, when you're devising your workout regimen, make sure that you kind of mix it up a little bit. Don't do the same activity. Like, don't go for the same 30-minute run, along the same route 5 days a week or 3 days a week. That's boring. That gets boring. I mean, some people maybe really like routine and that works for them and that's good. But try to mix it up. Try to do different activities, a mixture of different activities. If if you like to run, switch up your run, do different paths, do different speeds, different types of workouts. But whatever you do, try to keep it fun, because remember, with diet and exercise, we're talking about achieving a healthy lifestyle, not just like, I'm going to do this regimen for 3 months and that's my plan. I mean, unless your goal is to train for some kind of sporting event, then you have like sort of a timeline on it. But essentially, you want to find some type of physical activity that you enjoy, that's fun for you, and that you can maintain indefinitely, pretty much. Mixing it up still. But so when it comes to the components of a workout regimen looks something like this. First of all, you always want to include a warm-up and a cool-down. A warm-up and a cool-down, a couple of minutes at the beginning and end when you do some stretching exercises. Okay, this helps get blood flowing to the muscles so that it increases your aerobic capacity a little bit, and it decreases your risk of injury. Same thing with cool down. It gradually your muscles are, after you work out, they're all heated up and raring to go, and you need to do a little cool down to sort of gradually bring them back down, cool them off. Your body in general does not like to undergo drastic shifts in anything. Drastic shifts in blood glucose levels or drastic shifts in temperature, whatever. So it's always good to gradually make changes. Same thing with your diet. You don't want to jump into if you normally eat 3,000 calories a day and you want to lose weight, you don't want to just cut down to a 1,000 calorie a day diet. You need to gradually make changes in your diet, gradually cut your calorie intake, gradually change your physical activity regimen, okay? And each time you work out, you need to gradually ramp up and then cool down. Okay, so then the workout itself, when you're deciding a workout regimen, you need to plan all of the following things about your workout. You want to know type. What type of activity are you going to do? Again, this is going to depend on what your goals are. If your goal is to achieve cardiorespiratory fitness, you want to improve your heart and blood and respiratory system, okay? You're going to want to engage in different types of aerobic exercise, so swimming or biking or running or something like that. Pick types of exercises that you think are fun and that are aerobic to improve your cardiorespiratory health. If your goal is to just get your minimum 30 minutes a day, you have any type, walking, cleaning, whatever. Pick your type of activity, and just make sure that it is a type of activity that will help you get to your goal. So if your goal is to be able to do a split by the end of the month, okay, going to the gym and lifting weights is not going to help you achieve that goal, I guess is what I'm saying. So you want the type of activity to be appropriate for your goals. Also, you need to decide what the duration of that activity is going to be. Are you going to run for 20 minutes or are you going to run for an hour, So type, duration, frequency. How often are you going to do it per week? Are we going to do this twice a week? Are we going to do it 5 times a week? Again, it depends on your goal. If your goal is just to maintain the sort of minimum recommendation of fitness, 2 20-minute runs a week are good. But if you are training for a marathon, you need to be running more frequently and for longer durations, okay? The intensity of the workout also needs to be decided. Is it going to be moderate intensity or vigorous intensity? Again, all of these things based on what your workout goals are. So if your goal is to run a marathon, you'll probably have some days you'll have lower intensity runs that go longer, and other days you might have higher intensity runs to increase your aerobic capacity and to improve your muscle strength. Okay, so you mix it up a little bit. And then progression is sort of, again, if you have some kind of a goal, a distinct goal that you're working towards, like running a marathon in 5 months, okay, then you need to have sort of a calendar planned out of how you're going to progress in that training process and how you're going to build up to your goal. As opposed to if you are just trying to maintain your fitness, you don't really need a progression. You just need to maintain the type duration, maintain a workout regimen on a weekly basis. It can be the same for, and just mix up these things. You don't need to sort of have a progression plan. Okay? So then this slide here just kind of is from my old textbook, showing you some examples if you are trying to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness, the frequency, intensity, and time of activities so you want to do at least 20 minutes at a time of moderate to vigorous intensity exercising 3 to 5 days per week. That'll help you build your cardiorespiratory fitness. If you're trying to build muscular fitness, if you want to build muscle and build muscle mass, 2 to 3 days per week at a moderate to high intense, actually this is a vigorous intensity type of exercise, and it tells you how many repetitions, how many different types of exercise you should do in order to achieve and also maintain muscular fitness. And then down here for flexibility. So depending on which type of fitness you're trying to achieve, you're going to do different types of activities, and they're going to be different intensities, and you're going to do them for different lengths of time, different durations. Okay, so those are things you'll want to consider and talk about in your diet analysis journal. The last part of the last assignment, the one that's on, that includes your physical fitness and sort of your physical activity plan. Okay, so that's chapter 11. About an hour and 15 minutes, I think I'm ringing in at, so somewhere in the middle of what my estimate was. And that's all, so see you next time.